Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Let's Talk Esports. My name is Yeso, as always, and today we're doing our 2023 CBLOL Obituaries. And don't worry, nobody died, but this is just an opportunity to talk about and say goodbye to the teams that we won't see any longer in 2023. The four teams that didn't make playoffs, whose year is unfortunately done here at the end of the regular season, that at time of recording finished just about 48 hours ago, almost on the nose, on Sunday. So won't be a super long video here, but do just want to kind of briefly talk about the four teams, my thoughts on their year, or at least their split, and maybe what they're looking forward to in the future, what kind of pieces they maybe want to build around to make some moves going into 2024. So we'll start at the bottom, we'll work our way up. So starting in 10th place was, unfortunately, KaBuM Esports, finishing with a record of 1-17. They're in 10th place. The roster at the start of the split consisted of Lonely, Flawless, Crastiel, Raven, and Redbert. And then, of course, the couple of changes that they made were in the jungle. Scary coming in there for a little bit there, as well as Samsk finishing the split on the last weekend for KaBuM. Their only win of the split was against Liberty back in week 6. Couple of interesting notes. Raven, one of only 2 pentakills in CBLOL this split in that win against Liberty, getting a pentakill on Kai'Sa. The only other pentakill was, interestingly enough, for B-Voy in the final weekend, on the final day of the split, also on Kai'Sa, interestingly enough. So definitely a highlight there moment for Raven. In terms of this team, this split, it's really unfortunate. They started really rough, and they did not look good at the start of the split. A big part of that was Flawless. He did not look good at almost any point this split. And of course, KaBuM eventually made the decision that they felt that that was the position they needed a change in, and they ended up moving in Scary, bringing him up from Academy. And that was definitely a really good move, because it felt like the dynamic of the team really changed. And of course, he ended up getting that one win. And if you look at KaBuM's performance in the back half of the split, and specifically just in kind of the last 3 weeks, this team looked a lot better. And they're a team that I maintain, at least in the back half of the split, played better than their record indicated. They had a lot of really good games against some really good teams in CBLOL, and just unfortunately weren't able to put together, more than one kind of complete game. And that's unfortunately why their record ends up the way it is. It also is important to note that, the best player on this team, and it's really no question, was Lonely in the top lane. This is a guy who, despite kind of all of the struggles the team was going through all split long, was consistently really solid. Like, I thought Lonely was impressive in multiple points during the split. And this is definitely a guy where, if you're looking towards the future of this team, this is dude you want to build around, right? And I mean, if I'm KaBuM, the members I really want to bring back is Scary in the jungle. Really like what I saw from him. You bring back Lonely, and probably Redbert, like very talented, very experienced support, and he wants to stay. That's a dude you bring back, and I think you just look for something different in bot and mid. There is something to be talked about in terms of like Crastiel, of course, role swapping back to mid. I thought he looked fine this split. I've had discussions with RMC, and if you guys watched some of the shows this weekend, RMC talked about feeling that Crastiel was actually pretty solid in mid lane. I'm not as high on Crastiel. I think he was fine. The big part for me is it felt like too often he just didn't bring enough in the mid lane. And it is important to note that the meta was not focused around mid lane this split almost at all. It was so bot heavy, and then we saw quite a few top laners taking over, especially when carries kind of started to come through, and things like the Rumble and the Jax, the Kennen, etc. And For me, Crassiel was just fine. I think he was okay in lane most of the time, but I really just didn't see enough from him. So I would be okay making a change in mid lane. And it does really feel like you have to make a change at AD carry. I'm not I don't want to write off Raven completely, but it definitely feels to me like Raven could probably use another year in Academy. And of course, it's important to note that like development in League of Legends esports, it doesn't work kind of the same way as you kind of see in traditional sports, where it's a more of kind of a linear progression. You can have a guy come up in sports and you go, okay, maybe it's a little too early, put him back down, and then that development continues and then he becomes a regular. Sometimes in esports, you can come up too early or too late and it just like it isn't there. So we don't know what will happen with Raven in the future, but I want to say, I hope he can go down to Academy and maybe get another year, but he definitely didn't look ready for the main stage in Brazil this year, and I hope he can figure it out. But I would say, if I'm KaBuM, I probably bring back top and support, and then scary as well, and look for some other solutions in bot lane and mid lane. But at the very least, I do want to say I'm really proud of the way that KaBuM finished the split. I think this is a team that I think realistically, a lot of folks would look at it and say, yeah, you probably give up at the end of the split, but this team didn't have any quit in them. They fought tooth and nail in so many games down the stretch, really gave so many teams a run for their money. And I'm really proud of them for that. And, a lot of folks will look at their split here and they'll just see the 1-17 number, and rightfully so. But when you really dig into it, this team played better than their record indicates. And I'm proud of the way that they finished things off. Now, next up is Liberty in 9th place. They finished with a record of 2-16. And this is the team that had the most roster fluctuation in this split, because they started the split with Chiari, AC, Avenger, Juliera, and Waz. And then it's important to note that in the back half of the split, at one point, they subbed in their entire Academy roster for a couple of weeks. So SKB, Drake Hero, Piloto, Reaper, and Cavallo came up from Academy and played for a couple weeks. Also important to note that Momochi did sub in for support for one game on the final weekend of the split. But this is a team that, I talk about KaBuM playing better than their record would indicate in the back half. Liberty looked like that early on. I think they had a lot of, they were one of the best early game teams at the start of the split. And that kind of continued throughout. But the problem is it just fell apart in the mid game. It kind of turned into a meme at the end of the split for us on the broadcast that Liberty would go up 3-0 in kills almost every game. But as soon as they hit that 3-0 mark, everything fell apart. And that's unfortunate. I think AC deserves a lot of credit for the success of this team in those early games. He was one of the best early game junglers. I really, really liked him. I was really impressed by his play at multiple points in this split. But unfortunately, Juliera really kind of got outclassed in the bottom lane a lot. Avenger was fine in the mid lane. Chiari was not great on the top side for me. And in terms of looking forward, important to note those two wins as well. KaBuM and Furia. They beat KaBuM in week 2, and they did beat Furia in their last game of the split in week 9, and that was the main roster coming back for that final weekend. If I'm looking to the future for this team, I would like a combination of kind of what they had at the top in terms of the start of the split and some of the Academy roster. So AC 100%. You got to bring AC back if you can. And I'd actually like to see the Academy bottom lane with him. Give me Reaper and Cavallo. Reaper has been a big late game carry for the Academy roster throughout the split, and they've been pretty successful in Academy. When they came up to the main stage, if memory serves, I think they were 7-5 and tied for 3rd place in Academy at the time, and Reaper is a big part of that. Cavallo, of course, is a support that has a good bit of experience, and I thought he looked solid when he came up. So I'd like to see AC, Reaper, and Cavallo back 100%. in the main CBLOL roster. And I think even Piloto makes a lot of sense, but if you want to go a different direction with mid lane, you certainly can. For me, the biggest question mark is just like getting something in the top lane. Chiari did not look great to me. SKB wasn't impressive in the handful of games that we saw, at least from my perspective, but I think there's some really good pieces that they already have here. It's just like question marks in the solo lanes for me, so we'll have to see if they can get things done on that front. But at the very least, for me, bring back AC, move up that academy bottom lane and see what they can do, and go from there. But I think there is some really good things on this Liberty side that you can build off of going into 2024. So keep an eye on Liberty there, excuse me. Next up, Los Grandes. How the mighty have fallen. The team that was, I mean, going into the last week of Split 1 this year, were competing for first place, right? And they, of course, absolutely were torching people at the start of Split 1, but they made some really interesting changes coming into this split. Of course, biggest one probably moving Ranger in a role swap, but the roster for Los Grandes, and let's start with the record first, I should say. They're in 8th place, 6-12 is their record, which is a flip-flop from last split. They finished 12-6 in Split 1 at the end of the regular season, now 6-12. The roster at the start of Split was Bowl, Trick, Lava, Natuno, and Ranger. The changes that they made after things didn't work out with Trick, they brought Anel in at jungle, and then of course they ended up subbing out Bull for Hedon in the top lane. This team was 2-0 versus both Liberty and KaBuM, so swept both of those season series. And then their other 2 wins were against Fluxu and Furia this split. Man, this team, like I was really excited about this team coming into the split because of course they were coming off of like a good Split 1 but a disappointing finish because they kind of fell apart in the later half of the split and then didn't impress in playoffs. But you've gotten Natuno, who we all know is a very talented AD carry, very experienced, right? And one of those, you know, CBLOL Academy, like homegrown products. The thought process behind the Ranger role swap, I think, makes a lot of sense to me, and I had a lot of confidence that that would pay off. And then, you know, for me, you know, sure, Trick is like coming out of retirement, but this is a guy with like a wealth of experience, right? So many European championships under his belt, so much international experience. And while I didn't expect him to come in and be like the same Trick from like his days playing with Perks on G2, I expected him to come in and be able to hold his own against CBLOL junglers fairly quickly. Didn't look like it. And I haven't dug too deeply into kind of the discussions around what, you know, what ended up happening, but he didn't look great early on. Los Grandes very quickly went a different direction, and unfortunately they never really recovered. Bull was not looking good in the top lane either, so that was a really rough part. The big thing for me was that I was not impressed by Lava last split. He definitely felt like one of the weakest links in the roster from Split 1. I thought Lava played great this split. He was, in my opinion, the most consistent member and the best player on this team throughout this split because I think Natuno was not great. And, you know, part of that is you know, suffering from being on a rough team in an AD carry-centric meta. But I think Natuno certainly deserves some criticism here. NL came in and was okay. Hedon I have some question marks about, but is young and I'd kind of like to see more from. I will say the Ranger experiment at support, I like it. We saw early on that at least initially Enchanter meta does not play to his strengths, and he wasn't very good. He definitely struggled early on in the split, and he didn't really look good on any Enchanters. But when we saw that meta shift to a more engage-heavy style from support, when things like the Nautilus, the Alistar, the Rel, and others came into the meta, I thought Ranger thrived. His Rel looked really good. We saw some Thresh from him that was really impressive. So at this point, I'm bought in on the Ranger at support experiment. I'm all for it. I think it's great. looking toward the future for this team, there's so many question marks. Of course, there were the rumors flying around that Netuno wanted to leave. Los Grandes Ranger has come out and said that those weren't true, if memory serves. Who knows what happens there? But if I'm looking forward to the future, really like Lava. I think you try to keep Lava. I like Ranger. If you could keep the Tuno, you do, right? This is a very talented AD carry who, to be clear, did not look like even a top 5 AD carry in CBLOL this split, but you know what you can get from this guy, and I think if he is willing to stay and keep that duo together of him and Ranger, I think you 100% go for it. The question marks around the top side. NL, I mean, look, he got put in a really tough position having to come in to replace Trick very early on in the split and trying to figure things out. Hedon, I'm someone who has gone on record saying that I kind of want to see what they have in Hedon, but also with the way that this team performed this split, you know, you'd probably be crazy to bring back 4 of the 5 members that finished the split, and I get that. So for me, the most likely changes we probably see are on the top side, top and jungle, and we'll have to see how that pans out, but I want to see Lava stay around. I like Ranger at support, and if you can keep Netuno, you probably certainly do, but we'll see where things go for Los Grandes going into next year. Now, last team we'll talk about is Furia. They finished in 7th place, a record of 8-10. Important to note, this team did make playoffs last split. They were in 6th place. They finished with a record of 9-9 that time around. So this time, 1 less win, 1 more loss, and they finish just on the outside there in 7th place. The roster, and interesting enough, one of the teams with the most roster upheaval between splits, actually the most, because they brought in 4 different players, or at least players in a new position, because of course this team had a role swap, but the roster all split long was Batao, Goot, Tuts, Ayu, and Zion. Ayu and Goot were the only 2 returning players, but Ayu did, of course, role swap from support to AD carry. Now, this team, important to note, the only team that they went 2-0 against this split was KaBuM. They 2-0'd KaBuM. Their other win, the other wins that they had were Fluxu, INTZ, Liberty, Los Grandes, Pain, and VKS. They all went 1-1 against those teams with the 2-0 against KaBuM. This team came out of the gate looking really good. The first 3 weeks, this team, and it's why, like, and I think this split was compelling all throughout, but the reason that this split was looking so compelling early on was that it felt like we had so many different teams that could compete. It really felt like through at least 2 weeks, I'll say, it kind of moved down, but through 2 weeks you felt like, oh man, there's 8 teams that compete here. It's kind of everybody but Liberty and KaBuM. And then unfortunately the fallout of the Los Grandes roster kind of continued, and after 3 weeks you were like, okay, there's maybe 7 teams that can compete here. But Furia looked really good early on. They were definitely mixing things up in champion select the most. I think IU, through the first 5 games, I think played 5 different champions. They were bringing out things like the Belveth in different roles. Zai, of course, has that Pike pocket pick that has been so good for him. And they were doing a bunch of different things. Also, Batao, who, at least after the first week, people had a lot of question marks about, started to get things like the Poppy and was looking good. So this was a team that was really exciting early on. And unfortunately, after about week 4, things just kind of fell apart and they couldn't really get wins. And, you know, they had a shot, right? Coming into the last week, of course, they had the most difficult way to qualify, because they had to win both of their games in the final week of the split. They needed VKS to lose both of their games. Important to note, those teams played on Saturday of the final week. And Furia had to have a combined win time in those 2 games of 33-36 or lower. That's an average win time of just short of 17 minutes. And to be clear, they went into that game against VKS on Saturday, and they absolutely torched them. They won in under 20 minutes. It was, I believe, 1956. So, like, they got close, but it wasn't close enough. And this is really disappointing because this is such an exciting roster. IU looked really good at the start of the split. wasn't as great later on, but this is still like I want to see more from IU because I was really impressed with what we saw from him early in the split. I really like Zayas's, support. Of course, won rookie of the split in split 1, and I think he's really, really good. Tuts, I was really impressed with. I mean, he was one of my early candidates for MVP. I thought his Annie play early in the split was so good, and I really, really liked what he kind of brought to this team. Batao and Goot, little more hit or miss for me, but like this is a team that realistically I could see bringing back the entire 5, especially because you only missed playoffs by. Granted, I think they missed it by 3 games. No, 2 games, I believe. So they just missed playoffs. They got 8 wins, only 1 win less than last split. And important to note, right? They got 9 wins last split with FMB and Envy on this team. So I wouldn't be surprised if they brought everybody back. For me, if you're making any changes, it's probably topside. You're probably looking at top and jungle, though. I mean, Goot is this like you've homegrown product within like the Furia ecosystem, and I would probably want to stick with him as well. So I'm not sure what the future holds for this team, but like I want to see more, and I want to see at least a majority of this roster come back next year, and try it, run it back. I have the most question marks. I don't know exactly how this team is going to look in 2024, but Furia was just so fun at the start of the split, and I want that back, and I'm bummed we don't get to see them in playoffs again, especially because last split they looked really good, right? They dumpstered Fluxu, they beat Red, they had, the deepest run that we've seen from one of those lower bracket teams in CBLOL since we switched to this format, and we'll just have to see how it pans out. But in the end, Furia, man, I just want to see more from this team because I felt like I got a taste of it at the start of the split, and unfortunately they didn't kind of fully deliver on it. So we'll see how things change for them in 2024. But that is it for my 2023 CBLOL Obituaries. We say goodbye to KaBuM, Liberty, Los Grandes, and Furia for the rest of the year. But we look forward to what they bring in 2024. So keep an eye on them. If you are watching this the day or the week of upload, just to note, I am going to drop a couple more videos this week. I'm planning on, before we kick off playoffs, Wednesday of this week, I should say, I'm going to drop a video explaining and talking through my ballot for All-Pro as well as the other seasonal awards in CBLOL. So I'll have that one for you guys tomorrow. And then Thursday, I'm going to do my predictions for the first round. We have 3 matches, 3 best of 5s coming up this weekend, and I'm going to kind of give my thoughts on each of those matchups as well as my predictions, so keep an eye out for that. And then, of course, Friday and Saturday and Sunday, we've got CBLOL. I'll be on the first 2 sets this weekend, so I'm hosting for INTZ Fluxu, as well as, or not that, VKS Fluxu, I should say, and then Pain and INTZ on Saturday. I'll be off Sunday, but I'll be on for those first 2 sets. But make sure you're coming around 9 a.m. Pacific time all weekend long. We'll have our first 3 best of 5s of the playoffs, so you're not going to want to miss it. But please, if you like the video, please consider liking and subscribing. And your thoughts on these teams, please drop them down in the comment section. I'd love to hear what you guys have to say about these 4 teams, and I'll keep an eye out for you on the rest of my videos later this week. So thanks so much for coming to hang out, folks, and I'll see you later.